Now, we talked about ways that you all make decisions and what you use to help you try something new or maybe switch products. You mentioned a lot of information sources, and I know you farmers are just like everyone else on the planet. We are bombarded with information sources, whether it's the traditional radio, television, print. Now we have these our cell phones right at our fingertips, where we get all kinds of information, both good, bad, and ugly. But the information is there. Let's talk about some of the information sources that you have and that you use and that you trust. Michael, let's start with you. What are some good places that you go to and trust for information when it comes to running your farm and ranch?
Well, as I said earlier, Kerry, in my last question, I mean, I trust a lot of fellow producers within my area, but not only that, but outside my area. And that really means a lot to me. I just do, because like I said, I've always believed in just sometimes watching other people. Sometimes you can learn more than anything just by watching other people and what they do, and especially if they're successful at what they're doing. So that's a lot. That means a lot to me, is just watching other local producers and fellow producers and people that I look up to in this industry.
Richard, how about you?
I reiterate some of the same message in terms of local networks. Watch what your fellow farmers are doing. But going back to extension and research, I said these guys actually get products, get new initiatives and different things and chemistries before the market does in a lot of ways. And I really appreciate their expertise and the analogy of that. Does it work, and what rates and things of that nature before I bring it in and try it on my operation. So I would say the research side, whether it be Texas, Mississippi, Missouri, Louisiana, all these extension facilities have the expertise on those different crop mixes. They can look at that and give us some good, reliable data.
Alicia, how about you when it comes to information sources that you trust?
Yeah, I think one of the things to kind of bring together both what Richard and Michael said is that, I rely heavily on independent resources. For me, it's the fact that I know nobody's trying to sell me something. When I'm reading an article on Magnetic Ag newsletter, I know that, it's a completely independent news, and they pull in news articles from all kinds of different sources. And they're just providing, basic information, basic commodity price updates. And I don't have to worry about a bias. And that's the one thing that I think on our operation that we're really trying to weed out, is when we're looking for information, when we're looking for data, what's the bias behind this? Is the salesperson showing me the data, or is it coming from a producer, like Michael said, or an independent newsletter, or an independent agronomist? And I think that's something that we've also utilized. In addition to extension services and university research, independent agronomists have been really helpful on our operation as well.
We started off this webinar talking about things that were in the news and things that were hot topics in the news. One of the things that we hear a lot about now is climate change. And I think Richard mentioned carbon earlier. We hear a lot about carbon and how that's affecting our farming operations. We hear a lot of news come out of Washington, D.C. about, what is this climate change, this conservation program? What is this carbon bank going to look like? That's an issue it's kind of gray, but it's right there in the front of our minds when it comes to farming and ranching, because we seem to be right in the crosshairs. Let's talk a little bit about that. How is this climate change discussion affecting you and your farming operation? What's in your mind right now every time you hear someone talk about agriculture and climate change? How does that affect the way you think and work on your farm and ranch? Richard, if you would start us on that one.
Like you said, it's a great topic right now because no one's had the foresight to define it for anyone in particular. It's in the most recent spending bill. It's referenced. CCC's got quite a bit of funding going to it. Is it going to change our traditional USDA NRCS programs, like the conservation stewardship programs, EQIP, and things of that nature? that have traditionally taken a sustainability, stewardship, conservation effort and approach? And is that going to be spun into a climate agriculture production approach and be a discount to tomorrow? And that's what I'm scared of today is there going to be mandates and limits, and people in Washington D.C. is going to tell me how many gallons of water I can use to put my rice crop in, and how many pounds of crawfish I can take out of my fields in a year, because I won't be climate sustainable if I take out too many. And I think you have a lot of people outside of the experts of agriculture looking at making some parameters that I'm really uncomfortable with moving forward, and I'm really concerned.
Michael, that climate change argument affecting your operation anywhere?
Well, I just think sometimes a lot of times when you hear climate change, you also hear the word that goes with it is sustainable. To me, they kind of go together. And as to mirror a little bit of what Richard says, yes, I'm afraid of some regulations that could come from some of these new ideals that's going on as far as when it comes to climate change, and maybe some carbon banking and things like that. There's so many things that are going on, like cover crop systems and things like that. We do a lot in our operation already as far as yes, we use a lot of reduced tillage when we can. We less emissions, less tillage, just some things that we hope that's adding to help on any type of climate change issues. But with that, I do think we have to be real careful, because not every cropping system or everything that they're trying to implement as far as like cover crops and stuff work very well in across the United States. Sometimes we can plant a cover crop here to help out as far as carbon banking, but we're not able to hardly plant a crop behind that cover crop, because it takes too much of our available resource of water from the crop that we're wanting to plant. So there are a lot of unanswered questions out there when it comes to that, but I want to revert back to that sustainable word I used. Our operation is 102 years old, and I feel like this, we try to stay up to date as we can, but we also try to use good measures as far as what we can do is to be profitable and sustainable all at one time, but also help the next generation also.
Alicia, how is the climate change issue affecting you and your farm? Is it weighing on your mind? Is it affecting any decisions that you're making going forward into the next year and beyond?
Yeah, absolutely. And Michael and Richard both had very good points on all of that I think I would reiterate. But it does come back down to leaving the land better than we found it. And we're fourth generation here, and we've got 3 little boys who absolutely love to ride in the cotton stripper and love to be on the tractor and love to be on the farm. And for us, that's why we're here. We're here to pass on the land to the next generation. And I think what I really wish people would remember and really take away is that we're not trying to do bad. We're not trying to harm the environment. We are constantly trying to improve the practices that we have on our operation, and we're trying to leave the soil better than we found it. And we are looking at mechanical practices. We're looking at technology. We're looking at anything that we can, because our land is our asset. The environment is our asset. We rely on Mother Nature to produce these crops. We're not, your food doesn't just come from a grocery store. It didn't just pop up in the back office and show up on the shelf. And I think that's so often forgotten. And I think that a lot of times people just don't have an opportunity to see it. And I would love to share our operation with somebody who just doesn't know, because so much of what we do depends on the climate, depends on Mother Nature and what's happening with the weather, what's happening in the soil. And because our land is our asset, and we rely on that to produce our crops, to feed our cattle, to feed our other livestock, we do have to constantly focus on what we can do to improve that and to make it better for generations to come, so that there is something for them to farm and provide food and fuel and fiber for the country.
And again, a reminder, if you're watching our webinar today and you would like to ask a question, you can do that with the Q&A function. We'll start answering some of those questions now. Here's one that's come in. Are growers going to uniformly drop inputs like fertilizer across all acres, or are they going to keep feeding their best land and abandon some of the less productive acres? Michael, would you like to take that one on?
I can just answer that for the area that I'm in currently, and I know the area that I'm in is probably not quite as productive as some areas across the United States. So yes, I would think you're going to see some like I said, some diversification in some crop selections, using less fertilizer, maybe some legume product crops that'll be grown, and then hopefully, and then maybe you're probably going to see like where we fertilize a lot of our coastal. We're going to probably try maybe some different products. There's some microbial products out there that we've been watching and had some neighbors trying and have some pretty good results from it. So I definitely think you're going to see some definite changes as far as how much fertilizer is put on certain crops, and whichever one can give you the most return on your investment is going to be a big key.
Alicia, how about on your farm there? Is it a situation where maybe you focus on your best ground and maybe not focus so much on your less productive ground?
I think it's important to consider that. I would say we probably won't remove it entirely off of our less productive ground. But for us, dryland versus irrigated is an important conversation that we're considering. Our irrigated land is obviously capable of producing higher yields than our dryland is in most years. This year was an exception for sure. As we got more rainfall, we were blessed with the rainfall that we had. So we will consider that when we're making our decisions on where we apply fertilizer versus or other inputs versus where we're not. Those higher value crops are certainly going to get a little more added to it because we know that we have higher potential for yields in those cases. But I think you also can't forget about those areas that aren't producing as much. We can't just completely go fallow in some of those cases, but we will reevaluate how much we're putting down on the areas that aren't as productive.
All right, another question that's come in. What gets your attention when a new product or service is introduced? What gets your attention? As we mentioned, there's a ton of information sources out there coming at you from every direction. What gets your attention as a farmer when a new product or service is introduced? Richard, why don't you take that one on for us?
Gary, I guess return on investment. What's the cost? What's the expected return? What's the time savings associated with it? What's the convenience? Things of that nature, and then from there, then I'll read into it further. That's what I want to see in the headlines. I want to read something that said, if you use my product, I'll save you 40 hours a year checking your water troughs with this product, and all of a sudden that has merit, that has value, and we'll do more research into it. We have an automated system in our grain drying facility where I can remote access and see what my grain bins are doing and the temperature of my grains. That has value because I can do things with it that provide additional income at the end of the year to the operation. And I think time and money is two things that need to be highlighted in that new product intro.
How about you, Alicia? What do you look at when it comes to a new product or service? What gets your attention?
I think Richard said it perfectly, time and money. And I guess one of the things too, from a personal standpoint, when you consider the hours that producers are spending in the field and on the road, driving from field to field, because in a lot of cases, they're spread out. We have 2 hours from one end of the operation to the next. And so we're traveling that distance to check pivots, check crops, run equipment, get water to cattle in some cases. So we're spread out. So when it saves us time, I'm willing to spend a little bit of money on a product if it's going to save me time. And again, another piece of that comes back to that balance between the business that we're operating and the family that we have. And yes, we love spending time as a family on the operation, but if my husband can sit at the dinner table with us and eat a meal with us, with myself and our kids, and be able to check his irrigation pivot in August, if it means that he's going to be able to sit down and enjoy that meal with us for 30 minutes before he has to go actually work on the pivot, it's great in my book. And so I think, you know, that the time piece is important, but it goes back to more than the bottom line. If it allows us to have a little more time together as a family at the dinner table, going to church, things that are important to us, it's also meaningful.
Michael, what gets your attention about a new product or service?
Well, they've already answered most of it, it's yes, time and money, but you know, I guess, you know, a lot of it is, it boils down to what, you know, return on my investment. I mean, is it really going to truly put money back in the operation to where it's justifiable? And, you know, a lot of things Alicia said, I just say yes, you know, family time and spending time with God is definitely high and needs to be higher in a lot of our daily lives. And it's definitely one that, if, you know, the business that we're in requires a lot of man hours. It truly does. And anything that we can do to help out on shortening those man hours and time invested in that, I'm all for it.
Thanks a lot, Michael. And I want to thank all three of our panelists today. Thanks so much, everyone, for attending this Texas Mid-South Farmer webinar brought to you by JL Pharmacus. We will be sharing a link to this webinar later this week, so keep an eye out for that, and keep an eye out for information on our next webinar in the JL Pharmacus Regional Series coming up next year. Again, I want to thank our three panelists for generously donating their time today, and I want to thank you for joining us. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.